First thing, of course, I'd like to greet all the participants. Welcome you to our first board meeting in 2023. Unfortunately, for reasons that you will know, it had to be postponed. But this is the first time that we meet this year, so I'm very happy to welcome you to this first board meeting at the start of a very promising and challenging year that we have ahead of us. I really hope that you have been all keeping well and safe and in good shape and prepared for an extremely challenging year that we have in front of us. This is also a very special meeting because this is the first meeting, the first IESBA board meeting after the launch of the International Foundation of Ethics and Audit on January 1st. As you are probably aware, even if it has not been yet fully disclosed, the preparations are still being made for that. But on the 1st of January, the Foundation for Ethics and Audit has been launched, and the IESBA, just like the IESBA, are now part of this new foundation, which has been established. It really marks a new chapter of our journey as a global standard setter, which has was being prepared for since a long time under the recommendations of the monitoring group, and became a reality and a fact on the 1st of January. So this is the first meeting of this board in this new context and this new institutional and governance environment, which is also something that we should highlight and welcome. I'm looking forward to very soon, I hope, share more information with you about this transition and the recommendations of the monitoring group in the near future. As I told you, some housekeeping is still being taken care. It was not possible to get everything ready on the 1st of January. But we just wanted to, everybody wanted to ensure that on that date, the foundation would have been launched, established, and we have that we had transitioned. The communications, the press release, website, etc., are still being taken care of, being developed. But I hope that in very early we will have more news and fresh news about that for all of you. So welcome as well to the first meeting of the IESBA board in this new context. Of course, I'd like to welcome our official, dear official observers, Begonia Giner from the PIOB, Galen Hansen, our CAG chair, Junpei Kato from the Japan FSA, and of course, I want to very specially welcome our new board members, Rania Mardini from Lebanon, and Paul Mutawa from Kenya. Our two new board members are joining us for the first time. They have been already in contact with the staff and with the team, being, what I hope to be a useful onboarding process. They are very welcome. They will reinforce the board, and they will add also some geographical additional representation and diversity, which is also very welcome. They have been selected by the newly created last year new nominations committee of the PIOB. So this is also new. So we are going through a lot of changes, hopefully and certainly for the better. Our two new board members were subject to a selection procedure, which was also completely new. We are very happy to welcome them to the board, and very much provide them with a lot of incentive to collaborate and feel part of the family as they are already. Paul Mutawa has had the opportunity to observe our November-December board meeting, so he's somehow a little bit already familiar with the dynamics. On March 3, there will be an orientation session for both members and some additional initiatives from which the other board members may also profit if they want to have some kind of refreshment or observe this kind of procedures. So at this stage, I'd like to invite Rania and Paul to very briefly introduce yourselves. Rania, please, can you start? Do you want to say a few words about yourself?
Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure to be here. I come from a very diverse background. I used to serve on the International Accounting Education Standards Board. I have a foot in academia and a foot in consulting. I started out in audit, so I have a diversified background. I work a lot at the moment in the area of sustainability, as part of the consulting work that I do with the United Nations Development Program. And so I really look forward to being part of this board and to working with each and every one of you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rania, and welcome once again. Paul, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you so much, Gabrielle. I think morning, afternoon, evening to everyone. A real pleasure to join you all. Myself, I come much more from the securities regulation background. So I used to lead the Kenyan regulator. I used to sit on the board of IESBA, and I used to chair the Africa Middle East Committee of the IESBA. And then after that, I went to the insurance space and led one of the larger insurance and financial services group in the East African region. And now I'm mainly doing a lot of consultancy in the capital markets development, as well as the green finance optimization space. Real pleasure to be joining you all, and I look forward to the work ahead. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Paul. Very welcome as well. Our new two board members will actually, as you can see from their words, add some diversity, additional knowledge, and regional geographic diversity as well. So you are really very welcome. We are very much hoping that you feel welcomed, part of the family, and with a strong incentive to contribute to our work on the next few times. So moving forward, I also would like to welcome Sue Almond, an IEESB board member and chair of the IEESB listed entity and public interest entity task force. I don't know if Sue is there, but you are very welcome. I hope so. I can't see everybody. Willy Botter, and I see him there, though without his camera, the IEESB program and technical director. Thank you both for joining us today and for being available to answer to any questions that we may have on the pilot project on the IEESB side. So I also take this opportunity to extend, of course, a warm welcome to the international observers who have registered to follow us today's meeting and today's discussions on the YouTube channel. And that especially highlight and include in this warm welcome our former IESBA Deputy Chair Caroline Lee and our former IESBA member Lisbeth Osterman. Thank you for joining us and for making sure that this is a family that well, people stay and remain and keep interested in what we are doing. A warm welcome also to the public observers joining us on YouTube. And with that, I'll move to focus on our agenda for today. And our agenda for today is on the PI rollout work stream. Sorry, I see a message from Paul. You acknowledge that Laurie is the new vice chair. Yes, Laurie is the new vice chair. And of course, a warm welcome that has been already sent to Laurie. But once again, welcome to the first board meeting where you are acting as vice chair. Very much a lot of expectations on you, Laurie. I said that before. I hope it's not a too heavy role for you being my vice chair. Our agenda for today is on the PI rollout work stream. We will receive an update from Andy Mintzer, chair of the PI rollout working group, on the progress on the IEESB narrow scope PI project. And we will also be considering the scope of the transparency requirement in the IESBA PI revision. Thank you, Andy, for all the work that you have been doing here and for leading this working group towards safe harbors. The reason for this special board meeting is that we really need to advance and move forward with a few issues. And this working group's presentation today demonstrates that the two boards continued making efforts to keep a high level of coordination to make sure that our global standards are aligned and are interoperable. And this board meeting is a sign and an evidence of that. But before introducing the topic and passing the floor to Andy, let me take this opportunity also to thank the working group and staff, of course, for their hard work in preparing the agenda materials. And all those of you joining this meeting at hours which are not very appropriate and very comfortable in your time zones. It's very challenging, and we truly appreciate your commitment. And with this, I would pass and give the floor to Andy, not before thanking him again for his availability, his commitment, and the good job that Andy has been doing here. Andy, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gabriella. And as you mentioned, to thank the working groups specifically by name, which are, this group is largely responsible for the presentation you're about to see and for the coordination of the PI rollout activities. The working group includes Luigi, Rich, Sungnam, who's also our correspondent member to the IEESB, Felician, and Yao Shu. And the terrific agenda materials were put together by Laura and Jeff. So I'm very grateful for all of that support. So thank you for putting my slides up. And we go to the next slide, please. So we have really two things to consider today, which, as mentioned, are the scope of the transparency requirement in our issued PI revisions that were approved previously, which also deals with the coordination with the IEESB on track 1 of their PI project. We'll have a brief update too also on the progress of track 2 of the IEESB's PI project. So in March of 2022, the IEESB approved a project proposal to undertake a narrow scope review on the topic of listed entities and PIs. And it set out the project is progressing in 2 tracks. First, track 1 is a faster moving track to determine whether the auditor's report is the appropriate place to enhance transparency about the relevant ethical requirements. As you recall, in our PI revisions, we, in our 400.20, we had a transparency requirement, and we couldn't specify the auditor's report because it's not our remit to specify auditor's report. So there, we anticipated and coordinated with the IEESB that they would take up this project, and in fact they have. Having also changed our definition of PIs for our code, the IEESB was going to undertake a second project, which was going to consider the further update to auditing standards, perhaps for the PI change in definition. And to be clear, what's happening today is the IESBA is considering the IEESB comments on an exposure draft and projects only for the purpose of our transparency requirement. We're going to update the board on the IEESB, but it's obviously the IEESB's purview to analyze the comments they had received for purposes of their track 1 and for their track 2. I'm not sure I explained this adequately in December, but the reason why we're having the special meeting now instead of having this put in our December meeting is because the comment period for their exposure draft ended actually after our November-December meeting began. And so we didn't think it was appropriate to rush the analysis of the feedback received from the public to undertake this important issue in the December timeframe, and hence this is what today's meeting is about. So if I can have the next slide, please. As mentioned, it's essentially the scope of the transparency requirement. So can I have the next slide, please? Now this slide shows the comment letters received, and you see there were 38 comments. They had a relatively wide, although a dispersion of comments, but they were mostly from IFAC member bodies and national auditing standard setters. And the IAASB has not yet considered the comments received. They'll consider them at their meeting next month. So can I have the next slide, please? Okay, so today we're really talking about our R400.20 of the IESBA PI revisions, which sets out the transparency requirement, and it's located in 4A of the code, which applies, as you know, to both the audit and review engagements, even if the word audit is only mentioned. However, the IAASB, as mentioned, needed to undertake this project to see if the auditing report was the appropriate place. In doing so, the IAASB exposure draft contained one question specifically to assist IESBA's consideration with regards to the existing jurisdictional requirements, and that's their question 5, which was to assist IESBA in consideration of the need for further action. Please advise whether there's any requirement in your jurisdiction for a practitioner to state in their report if they're independent of the entity in accordance with relevant ethical standards. So among the respondents that responded to the questions, 3 jurisdictions, as noted here, Australia, New Zealand, and the United States, were identified as having requirements for the practitioner to state in the report that they're independent in accordance with relevant ethical standards. On the other hand, there were 14 jurisdictions that did not. In March of last year, just about a year ago, we were informed that a question had been raised in the IAASB's discussions about the applicability of the transparency requirement in our 400.20 to review engagements. Given that the drafting convention specifies that the term audit engagement equally applies to review engagement, Part 4A applied, but this question had come up in the beginning of the IAASB's deliberation process. So to address this, the IESBA and IAASB agreed to seek this initial feedback through the IAASB's exposure draft, since we had that opportunity, and ask whether to revise ISRE 2400 to operational of the transparency requirement for reviews. And and then for us to consider whether or not we meant to have the transparency requirement applied to review. So at our March 2022 meeting, we acknowledged that we may need to address this matter and determine what to do. So that is what we're doing now. Now, although the slide up here shows which jurisdictions have requirements to disclose the practitioner's independence, I have noted before, and I think those with the familiarity of the standards know that in section 2400, the title of the report is independent, report of independent practitioner reviewer. And in 2410, that the review engagement is performed by the independent auditor. So the concept of independence is either in the title or in the body of the report in accordance with the IAASB standards. But the differential requirement with regard to auditing standards for PIs is not, with the exception of just a few jurisdictions. So if I can have the next slide, please. So as was mentioned, here is the famous R400.20, which is subject to the confidentiality requirements in R400.21, which is an exception if disclosing the PI requirements would accidentally or inadvertently reveal confidential information about the entity's listing plans. Other than that exception, there's a requirement that a firm has applied the independence requirements for PIs as described in our revision. So given this background about what I said about the question that's been raised, the information that's been received, the working group has considered for us to consider today 2 options, which we cleverly named option A and option B. Option A is to maintain the scope of the transparency requirement to be applicable to both audit and review engagements. In other words, keep our hand as we've dealt it, Or option B is to revise the scope to apply the transparency requirement to audit engagements only. And then if we do go down that road, then we would need to consider whether we can do that as a IESBA board by itself, or whether additional exposure is needed. So let me tell you about the working group has a view on that, and I'm going to be asking for the board's opinion about the working group's view. So if I may please have the next slide. Thank you. So the working group believes that option A would better serve the public interest. The working group discussed this over a couple of meetings, and our view is that maintaining the R400.20 applicable to both audits and reviews would better serve the public interest because of the heightened expectations of the stakeholders of PIEs. And that's essentially everything that was the underlining feature in back of our PI project and the revisions that we issued. The practical impact of applying the transparency requirements to reviews of PI's annual financial statements is negligible, since those engagements are rare. That is, we have learned that it's rare that there would be a review of a PI entity that didn't have an audit. I think there probably are some, but incrementally we thought that we had understood they were rare in our outreach. In terms of PI interim reviews, there is public interest, nevertheless, in having a transparency requirement if those engagements are performed by a practitioner who is not the PI auditor. A few jurisdictions already require the practitioner to comply with the transparency requirement. This shows that having such a requirement is not unreasonable and does not pose relevant practical ethical problems. On the other hand, as highlighted in the working group's agenda paper, the fee transparency requirement, which does have an exception based upon whether they're review clients, that's our R410.33. And that's R410.33 within the fee standard says that this section sets requirements for a firm to communicate fee-related information of an audit client, that's a PI, and to disclose publicly fee-related information to the extent the client does not disclose. An exception to those requirements, the firm may determine not to communicate or pursue disclosure of such information where the review client is not an audit client. So I think a legitimate fact for the working group and for us to consider is whether this differential requirement that we've established in the fee is relevant to what we're undertaking today. The working group is the view that there are some important differences between these two provisions. Specifically, R410, the fee requirement, discloses just a part of the auditor's relationship. That is the review, the fee dependency, that is. While R400 is about whether the auditor has applied the whole array of the PI related differential standards to the independence of a certain client. And so this shows that these provisions have two different scopes. The proportionate approach in the fee proposal 410 is not necessary here because the disclosure in R400 is not that burdensome on firms. It's essentially a binomial disclosure. You applied the independence requirements of PI, or you applied independence requirement to something different, as opposed to the differential in 400 in the fee in point 33, which was to identify and track and disclose separately the fee of an otherwise disclosed an otherwise disclosed. And I think we had feedback for reviews that this could be burdensome and not all that incrementally useful for the public. We also considered whether changing the scope of our 400.20, effectively narrowing it, would limit a requirement that the board previously approved, which it would, and so this could be perceived as IESBA moving backwards from a public interest perspective. Finally, the working group also wanted to place out there that perhaps this would be more appropriate to consider in the post-issuance review and see if, in fact, there is some problems or issues with this as the PI standard is implemented that might be considered after it's released and and applied. So for this reasons, the board, the working group had the reasons in favor and the reasons opposed to option B. So we are recommending option A. I should also tell you that the working group decided that if the board nevertheless decides to choose option B, that is limit the scope of our transparency requirement to only audits, we believe that a further exposure is necessary. But we would also respectfully request that that would be after the IAASB's approval of track 1. So we don't have the awkwardness of going back and forth with where the location of this transparency requirement is. That we have our rule in place, let the IAASB continue its finalization of track 1, and then if the board decides to limit it to review, to undertake a specific task at that point and to expose it. So can I have the next slide, please? So now we're up to the action requested. And so the first question is, do IESBA members agree with the working group's proposal not to change the scope of R 400.20 of the IESBA PI revisions, as we've set out in our agenda item 1A, and as I've just described? And if I could have the next slide, please, just to put everything on the table. If the board determines to revise the scope of R 420, do IESBA members agree with the working group's view that the amendment should be exposed? And again, if the answer is yes, do you agree with our view that it should be only after the IAASB is finished? So let me then back, if I can, without too much trouble, asking you to please back up to question 1. Thank you. So I think at this point, Gabriella, it's unless maybe I should first invite Laura or Jeff or any of the working group members if they have any other points to add before we turn it over to the board to debate this issue.
I'm good, thanks, Andy. I think you've explained it quite well. So looking forward to the board's feedback.
Okay, terrific. So now is the time, Gabriella, that I'll turn it back to you to invite the board for their feedback on this question asked by the working group.
Thank you very much, Angie, for this very, very clear presentation. And I think that the question is made in a way and grounded in ways that don't need me to add anything. The question is very clear, the proposal of the working group as well, which is to support option 1. So it's time for the board to contribute with thinking or comments or questions, inviting also Sue Almond and Willy Botte in case they want to come in and say something. Please feel free at this stage to contribute as well. So the floor is open for comments, questions, expression of preferences to the board members. Please raise your virtual hand. Yeah, I see one. Chana. Hello, Chana.
Hi, Gabriela. Thanks, Andy, for the presentation and the work of the working group. I read some of the submissions to the IAASB exposure draft as well. And I think there is enough stakeholders who say that they generally read what is in part 4A as audit and review. And then there, I saw some stakeholders who were not agreeing to expanding it into review. And I'll take a case in point, Japan, but then later on, they say that they do apply it to quarterly reviews. So I see some inconsistency there. I mean, in Australia, we have been running this for, I don't know, probably nearly 2 decades, where the listed entities have to do a half-year review and the auditor has to say that they're complying with the independence requirements, and there is no difference between the independence requirements for the full year audit and the half-year review. So on that basis, I support working groups option A.
Thank you very much, Chana. Any other board members want to share their comments or express support or disagreement? Sadia, please.
I think Mark was first, but Mark, if you'll allow me. I agree with the task group's proposal of option A for everything that Andy has presented, but especially that it applies to a limited number of entities. The one item that wasn't included but should be considered is that this definition and this proposals are currently underway in lots of conversations on adoption and implementation, and any changes to it now will create a bit of confusion and a little bit of delay in how adoption will take place. The second question, if we do go the route that we would want to make amendments, I also believe we would need to re-expose just the proposal on limiting it to audit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chana, and apologies, Mark. I didn't see your hand being raised. So, but
thank you, Gabriella. I'm in the same place as Chana and Sadia. I agree with the proposals that the working groups put forward, and I think Sadia's point in particular. You know, I think this is a reasonably well understood area. And I think if we were to try and do something else, we might make it a less well understood area. So for those reasons, I'm very comfortable with the proposals that are set out in the paper.
thank you very much, Mark. Sanjeev.
Thanks, Gabriella. Thanks, Andy, for a good presentation. I also agree with what Andy has presented, and I think as probably and with the option A, and I think as Andy pointed out in the subsequent slides, that maybe the post-implementation review would be a more appropriate time to consider this. So I will also go with proposal A at this point of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanjeev. Jens, please.
I'm very brief. I fully agree with the proposal of the working group, option A.
Thank you, Jens. Paul, please.
Thanks so much. I think more than anything, it's just to commend the working group, the clarity of what they presented, that even as an early new voice to this conversation, I would also concur with the recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. There is some noise, but I think that we understood everything that you said about the clarity of the proposal and your support to the proposal of the working group. Thank you for that. Laurie, please.
Yeah, I join in commending the working group and also its chair, who's busy on many other groups at this particular moment, with pulling together a really sensible solution and that's easy to follow and understand, and I support it.
Thank you very much, Laurie. Well, Andy, I think that we don't have anyone else wanting to provide comments. I don't know if from the IESBA side there is anything that you'd like to say at this stage, but if not, Andy, this seems very clear. We have, well, we still have Sue Alman. Welcome.
Thank you, Gabriella, and thank you to the IESBA for the feedback there. I actually just wanted to come in on one point of clarification on Channa was highlighting around interim reviews, which of course is not what we're looking at this particular point. That's already dealt with in the different standards. So the question here is around what I think has been explained as being the rare circumstances where you have a review of a PI financial statements that is not connected to the audit. But I think that's been picked up by some of your other speakers. So hopefully that's well addressed in the and I know the working group has been conscious of that.
Thank you very much, Sue, for the clarification, and thank you for joining us so that everything gets immediately clear for the IESB. Any other comments? So Andy, this is seems very clear, pretty clear. We have 8 board members who expressed their support, expressed support to the proposal of the working group. For the others, I will assume that silence means support. So we have.
If I could, Gabrielle, I'd point out there are 6 members of the board who are on the working group, so I think we can count them joining into our fellow board members who did speak up today.
I can imagine. So, yeah. So what we have on one way or another is, I think, the full support from this board, including mine, to this proposal. Thank you for that. So I don't know if you want to follow up on your presentation or take make some considerations on what this positioning of the board will mean.
Administratively, it sounds like then, Gabrielle, we don't need to take up a formal vote since we seem to be in violent unanimous agreement with regard to the working group's proposal. Is that correct?
I think so, but in these situations, I always ask for Ken's confirmation. Do we need to take a formal vote? Ken?
No, there's no requirement for a formal vote, Gabriela. I think the unanimous support from the board is very clear, and that is sufficient.
Thank you very much, Ken. That makes our life a little bit easier. I hereby declare the unanimous and full support of the board to the proposal, which allows us to live without a formal voting. At this stage, Begonia, I was going to ask you if you wanted to add anything, but I see that you do. So please.
If I could, I'm interrupting. I'm sorry. We do have one more slide left. I don't know if it's appropriate to hear from Begonia after we have our one more slide, or did you want to hear it now?
I wait.
Okay, so
if you can advance one more after this, that's a heading, and then one more. I promised we would get a very brief track 2 update, really only to keep the board informed of the progress. And it is a very effective, I think, coordination between the 2 boards, as it was the entire time that the task force was considering this project. But with regard to IESB's track 2, if I can, I understand Willie is going to update our board on the IESB and invite Willie or Sue to update us at this point with regard to their project. And then after that, Gabriella, I'll be all in, and we can continue with the PIOB's comments. Willie, is up to you if you'd like.
Yeah, thank you very much, Andy, and good morning and good afternoon and good evening to all the colleagues on the ethics board. I'm very happy to quickly update you on the IESB track 2. Maybe before I go into the track 2, thank you very much for the previous discussion and also to the working group and the IESBA staff to bring this to the board, because this is also very important for us to have clarity on this point. And I think based on the previous discussion, it is very clear that the ethics board is in support of option A. Maybe just to clarify what the effect of that will now be on our side. Basically, we will now continue, as we've indicated in our explanatory memorandum to track 1, that if there is support for us to also consider the implications or also consider the operationalization of the requirement in R400.20 for review engagements in accordance with ISRE 2400, that we will continue to do that as part of our Track 2 project. So what the implication now is that we will simply continue with that process. Right, so in terms of the ask about Track 2, so as Andy indicated at the beginning, the Track 1 is purely focused on the transparency, operationalizing the transparency requirement in the code through the auditor's report. And that track that project is well on track, and we will have a discussion at our March meeting with the board, where we will provide them with the full feedback on our exposure draft. Part of that has now already been shared with your board today. In December, at our December meeting, our board also had its first fulsome discussion on Track 2 of the project. And I wanted to just give you a quick update on what the board indicated during our December meeting. So out of the December meeting, there was agreement by the IESBA for adopting the objective in paragraph 400.8 of the code into our quality management standards, particularly ISQ1, as well as into the ISAs, in particular in ISA 200, as well as for adopting the purpose of such the objective in terms of paragraph 400.8 would be around the establishment of differential requirements for pies. And we've also agreed to adopt the purpose of such requirements based on paragraph 400.10 in the code, obviously just tailored to be suitable for the ISQMs and ISAs. The board also agreed to adopt the definition of publicly traded entities as a replacement term for listed entities, and also to adopt the definition of pies for purposes of the IASB standards. And then also there was agreement that we will look at paragraph 400.9 in the code, as well as a few of the other paragraphs, to have a list of factors that are considered in terms of determining the degree of public interest in the financial condition of entities. Based on those decisions, we obviously now have to also look at our existing differential requirements in our standards, where, as you know, we have certain standards, particularly in the ISQ1 standard, ISA 260, and in our reporting standards, where certain requirements were designed to only apply to listed entities. So in accordance with the decisions that I've just explained, the board was also in agreement that those existing differential requirements should now apply to publicly traded entities and pies. So those requirements should be extended to apply to all pies, with one exception. And the one exception is the differential requirement that currently sits in ISA 720 revised that deals with other information. And that is because there are certain real practical challenges with that standard that was pointed out in our post-implementation review on our auditor reporting standards. And therefore, that project has been highlighted as a potential future project in our strategy and work plan consultation, because we do believe that that standard requires a broader revision. So that is the one exception. There were a few concerns that were raised by the board as well. The main ones being that there was a concern expressed about extending the requirement for engagement quality reviews to apply to all pies, taking into account that the quality management standards have just become effective now in December 2022. So there was a little bit of a concern about timing and the effect on the market. And there was also a little bit of, well, not concern, but the board expressed a view of, let's just make sure that when we go out on exposure, that we ask very specific questions about any consequences for extending the CAM requirements, the key audit matter requirements, to apply to all pies. And as you know, at the moment, they only apply to listed entities. And then the board had various drafting suggestions as well. So that's where we left the track 2 of the pie project at the end of the December meeting. And as indicated in your cover note for today's board meeting, We have also indicated that track 2 of the project will now pause, and we plan to only pick up that project again in Q1 2024. Now, I just wanted to share with you a little bit of the rationale for that. So in Q4 last year, towards the latter part of Q4, we did have a relook at our forward agenda. And based on various factors, we had to make certain changes to our forward agenda. And those factors include the overall staffing situation of the IESB, the need to clear the path for our sustainability assurance project by creating additional staff capacity and board capacity to prioritize the sustainability assurance project, as well as looking at the sequencing of deliverables across all our current projects. And therefore, the timelines of certain projects were affected, and one of the project's timelines that was affected is by track 2, and that's why we've decided to only pick up that project again in Q1 2024. However, track 1 is not affected. Track 1, we are going ahead, and we should be approving the final proposals at our June meeting this year, because remember, that was the key one where we wanted to make sure that any revisions to the auditor's report becomes effective at the same time as the listed entity and PI changes to the code. So that is still very well on track, and we are very hopeful that we will be able to approve that at our June meeting. So thank you, Andy, for that, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Vili. Any questions for Vili? No questions. So, Andy, now I think it's time to give the, Ken, please. I was not seeing your hand.
Yes, thank you, Gabriel. I just wanted to, in fact, to just turn to Jeff. Jeff, I don't know if you wanted to raise with the board the idea of a staff Q&A on the matter of interim reviews. Was this on the on the items?
Yeah, it was in the, thank you, Ken. We've raised this in the issues paper as well, that we wanted to add a question in the staff prepared Q&A, which have circulated, of course, for fatal flaws last week, and we received feedback from the board already, and thank you for those who's responded. We want to add an additional question, essentially to highlight in terms of to clarify, I suppose, in terms of auditors conducting a review of the financial statements of the PI clients, that in the event they already have to disclose the application of PI requirements as part of the transparency disclosure under R 400.20 as part of the audit engagement. So in a sense, that is a sufficient, I suppose, effort in terms of complying with 400.20. So we just want to clarify that and add that question to Q&A. We don't anticipate, we don't intend to recirculate that question to the board, but we will just add that question. I see a hand from Chana.
Yeah, Jeff, I did read that, and I wondered, is that trying to get around the standard? Because it says that if you do a review, you still need to say that you complied with the relevant ethical requirements.
Yeah.
So my concern was, are we trying, is that a way of, it's like an exemption that is not really in the standard?
If could I?
Yes, go ahead, Andy, please.
Yeah, and I think this is where the fact that we didn't get to mention that it was in the report that actually is coming in handy for this purpose, since China, it's a very good question, and the working group did consider that. The requirement is the firm shall publicly disclose that fact in a manner deemed appropriate, taking into account the timing and accessibility information to stakeholders. So the working group believed that since the transparency requirement was transparency for independence of the firm, and that's being publicly disclosed, and it's not being tied to a particular report, that would actually meet the requirements of our transparency requirement in 420. So at least that was the working group's view, since the transparency requirement is just for publicly disclosure and not for public disclosure in a report.
Yeah, okay. So, so what you're saying, and is, so it's not the audit report, you're not, it will be in the transparency report.
Well, our requirement is to publicly disclose that in a manner deemed appropriate.
Yeah.
So I think the working group is of the view that the Q&A would establish that if it's disclosed in a manner deemed appropriate, and if that manner deemed appropriate happens to be the annual report, then that qualifies as an actual compliance with R400, with the R in R400.20, and that the firm would not need to incrementally redisclose it in some other, either in the review report. I mean, they probably maybe can, but they wouldn't need to necessarily do that. So that was the working group's view, and that's the idea of this Q&A for the majority of the cases where the review is performed by the independent auditor of the PI.
Yeah, they would disclose it. So are we aware of an instance like that happening, Andy, or this is just a solution?
Go ahead, Andy.
No, good. I mean, I think we discussed as a working group and believe that it was not needing a solution because the public disclosure would have been made already for the PIs that was subject to an annual audit, for which a disclosure, and of course in compliance with our ethical standard, that that public disclosure could just be in any manner deemed appropriate.
Okay. All right, thanks, Andy.
Okay, Shanna?
I was going to say, the working group in terms of drafting the additional question and particularly the response will of course be cautious in not to respond in such a way that it gives perception that we are making new requirements or matters that have not been discussed by the board. So the response will be broad and aligns with the discussion of the board and the decision of the board. But Ken, I think you want to come in to give some clarification.
Mark was before me,
Okay.
please.
Mark.
Thanks, Ken. I was only going to say that I sort of share the concern about using non-authoritative guidance to try and give an interpretation that may sort of divert from the position of the code itself. And my preference would be, if there's a need for clarity, we try and provide that clarity in the code rather than non-authoritative guidance. So I would personally lean away from a question rather than adding one. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Mark.
I mean, I think I would also agree with Mark that we better not do a question which gives a perception of trying to work around that requirement. And maybe, as Sanjeev said, we look at it as a post-implementation review.
Okay.
Yeah, no, I was, that is, Mark's intervention is helpful from my perspective, and I think I was going to ask if the rest of the board could weigh in on this as well, that staff won't include a Q&A on this matter, and therefore the transparency requirement would apply to interim reviews as well. If the board is comfortable with this, then staff will proceed accordingly.
I would clarify, Ken, that it does apply to review. It just how it's being operationalized by firms, and so I guess in removing that question, I mean, we'll leave it to firm to make that decision, of course.
Correct.
Rich,
Right.
you've got to respond.
Yeah, I was going to reiterate, I think what Andy said. The standard doesn't call for it to be in the interim review report, and as in some jurisdictions, interim review reports, while required to be performed, are not actually published. So if one was published, it would seem in the jurisdictions where one tends to publish those, they are required of entities that would clearly be PIs. I wonder if that isn't also pretty obvious, combined with what other, the fact that you may have completed the final, just disclosed it in the most recent audited financial statements, as well as there be disclosure and transparency reports and perhaps other ways. So I didn't see putting an FAQ in, and maybe it wasn't worded well, as well as we could have maybe, but I didn't see that as a trying to get around the code. But I don't have a problem if we leave it out, the FAQ out, and just let people come to their own conclusion on how to comply. Thanks.
Thanks, Rich.
Thank you, Rich, and all. Is that everything clear to you, Andy, Jeff?
I think Ken has asked if other board members have can give us some feedback whether to include that additional question or not, in addition to the comments from Sunny, Mark, Chana, and Rich. Sadia?
I was wondering if this question, as the working group deals with it, can be circulated to the board for comment. Then it will be able to understand whether it is creating an exception from the rule. I was following Rich's line of thought, especially when the basis for conclusion does talk about this, about whether it's in a manner that is deemed appropriate, accessible, and timely. So if we use those wording, then we may be able to link that with whether the review engagement, the review report is accessible or publicly available.
Thank you, Sadia. So to Ken's question, any other reactions or comments? And Andy, Jeff, Sadia's proposal, is that something that you could accept?
Yes, to actually circulate the Q and our proposed A, so that the board can see if we're being too clever by half, or if we're in fact just answering a question without interpreting the code. As I think the first time I raised the issue of the Q&A, is it is a fine line between answering questions about implementation versus interpreting or modifying the code. And so I completely agree with the comments that we don't want to do the latter. We want to do the former, to just answer questions about the code and not change what the board has otherwise deliberated or issued.
Okay, so I think staff can do that. We'll circulate the question to the board, and we'll ask if it's appropriate, and if we should include this additional question in the Q&A.
Yeah, Jeff, what I take away from the discussion essentially is that staff will prepare the draft Q&A and circulate it to the board. If the board feels it is in the nature of a clarification and not an interpretation of the requirement, then we can go forward and include it in the list of FAQs. If the board feels it is stepping over the line and extending the code in a way that's outside the code in effect, yes, then we take it out and leave it as it is in the code. and allow firms to implement the requirement as they would interpret it.
Okay. Great. Thanks, Ken, and thanks, everyone. Back to you, Gabriella, and I think.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. I think that we have here clear clarity about the next steps, apart from the approval of the proposal related to the first part of the presentation. Thank you for suggesting that, Ken. I think that this is really what will make this decision more robust. And thank you, Andy and Jeff, for being ready to prepare the question and circulate it to the board. Indeed, there can be a very thin line between the two. So thank you very much. Before we finish the discussion, I'd like now to go back to Begonia and ask Begonia, please, to provide your comments.
Thank you, Gabriela. Really, I don't have much to say. It's just to say that from the point of view of PIOB, the decision to clarify that the transparency requirements are applied to review engagements is a good decision. We think that from the public interest perspective, this is the thing you have to do. Is there are no reasons to limit the public disclosure to audit engagements, and any other thing would be going backwards instead of going in advance. So we think that the decision you made is good, and the coordination that you are having the IESBA with the IESB is a really good step towards keeping good standards and a good code. About this last thing about the interim reviews, let's see what you finally decide, but I guess it will be a strong decision based on the opinions of the different members of the board. So nothing to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Begonia, for your words, and we are happy that you are happy. I think it was clear from Andy's presentation that the reason why the working group was proposing option 1 was exactly and mainly because of this was the proposal that would better serve the public interest. So it was expectable that to receive a positive approach from the PIOB. So I don't know, Andy, anything else on your side? Andy, Jeff, on this topic, which is the topic of the agenda?
No, I think we're all in. I did also want to thank Willie and Sue for their contribution, and to just say how impressed I am with the coordination of the two standard setting bodies working together. Our remit was the ethical standards and the transparency of the ethical standards, and we didn't know how the IESB would take up the issue of the differential auditing, if that would expand too. So the direction of travel is that they are, as Willie mentioned, with regard to the ISQM and almost all the other ISIS, which I just wanted to personally say I think was a terrific direction of travel. Starting off with our ethical requirements, and then how it continues on into the auditing standards. So look forward to the continued coordination with the IESB on that project. So thank you for participating in that process and in our meeting. And thanks, Gabriella, for the indulgence of letting them update us, because I believe it did have some public interest implications as well. So that's all I have. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Andy. That's what we are here for. We're working all with the same objective and goal. Thank you all very much for the contribution, especially to the working group and to the staff for being able to put together the material for this exceptional board meeting that was necessary to ensure a proper not only coordination with the IESB, but to make sure that the IESB work was completely interoperable with what we are doing and deciding. And yes, this is how we want to go more and more in the future, is making sure that we are not only aligned, coordinated, and building meaningful bridges and collaboration opportunities between the two boards. I'm mindful that we are beyond schedule. I think that James still wanted to say something about the new foundation James, very briefly, do you want to step in and provide us with additional information on that topic?
Thank you, Gabriella. I'll be brief, and there'll be more time in March where I can go into more details at the board's pleasure. First of all, just let me echo welcome to Rani and Paul, and congratulations to Laura. On the foundation, I just want, Gabriella gave a very good overview. Let me hit you a couple of points where I think it's just helpful for you to understand really the progress that's been made in a very short period of time. Institutionally, all the arrangements are, of course, settled. Funding for the foundation and for the SSBs have now been agreed and provided. And that includes an incremental increase in our funding for the staff build-up over the next few years. Operationally, banking and finance functions are in place for the foundation, separate from IFAC. Transfer of staff from the IFAC employment to employment under the foundation is in progress. And finally, as Gabriella alluded to, shortly we will have a launch of the foundation website and a public communication. So I just wanted to give the board a general sense that it's an entity that's not only been established, but the progress of operationalizing us as entities or bodies within the foundation is well progressed, and as an independent entity from our former housing within the IFAC organization. So very briefly, and I look forward to seeing all of you in March.
Thank you very much, James. And of course, if anything in between today and the March board meeting happens, or if there are any relevant developments, of course, we will find ways of making sure that you are updated and informed as you should by email or by any other means. Thank you very much. So, well, thank you for your contributions to this meeting and to and leading up to this meeting, mostly the working group and the staff. And thanks again for the IFAC for hosting this meeting virtually. And for the whole staff for their very hard working, making this meeting as seamless as possible. Thank you to all of you. The next board meeting, as we were mentioning, is going to be held in March 13 to 17 in Abu Dhabi, United Arabian Emirates. I'd like to invite Ken to give you a very brief update of the March board meeting, but let me just, as a final word before that, say that of course I'd like to see as many of you, if possible, all of you in person in Abu Dhabi, and this is also an important moment. This is going to be the first in-person IESBA meeting in the Middle East, and of course we'll very much look forward to our discussions there. Ken, do you want to update the board on some operational details?
Thank you, Gabriella. Very briefly, just so the board knows, ADA, the Abu Dhabi Accountability Authority, after some further reflection, have decided to reschedule their big conference. They had originally planned to organize a summit of stakeholders in Abu Dhabi to announce a number of key initiatives they have been pursuing. They have had some changes in terms of management of those initiatives, and therefore they determined that it would be better to postpone that conference to the latter part of this year or early next year. Our board meeting will still proceed as originally planned in Abu Dhabi. It will take the 5 days of the week. We will need every day of the week, so do plan accordingly. Staff is also working on 1 or 2 social activities to break up the what will be an intense week. So you can also anticipate that you will receive further details on that matter. And finally, in terms of hotel arrangements, ASTU is working very diligently and is in fact in weekly contact with our counterparts at ADA, and we will be able to circulate hotel details as soon as we have the options from our interlocutors at ADA. So that's just for everyone's information. Again, just watch out for more information coming through from ASTU. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Any question from board members with respect to the next board meeting or any other issue? So if not, thank you very much once again for your participation, and to those who made this meeting possible. Special greetings to the IESB members that are always welcome to our board meetings, and I very much hope to see you in person, if not before, in March in Abu Dhabi. Yeah, possibly some of us will meet online before that, but I'm very much looking forward to your contributions for the March board meeting in Abu Dhabi. Thank you very much. Have a very good weekend and see you soon.
Bye-bye, everyone.